As you can tell, this form which we built here is a bit more complex. Not super complex, but it does have more than just 2 or 3 form controls. Now, some of these form controls, like street, number, postal code, and city, also kind of belong together, or password and confirm password. And we can also see that visually. These two are next to each other. These are in this address group here. Now, you might want to reflect that structure in your form model, so in that form group you're setting up in your code, because that might make working with it easier. It might make extracting data more logical. And therefore, you don't have to do it, but you might want to add some structure to your form group here, and you might want to add some nested form groups. And that's something that you can do, and that is thankfully pretty easy to do. For example, if we want to group these passwords together, we could add a property named passwords here. This name also is up to you. And this would now not be a new form control, but instead a new form group. Just as the overall form is a form group. But you're not limited to using a form group just to create a form. Instead, you can also have nested form groups to add structure to your form. This will also later help us with creating a validator that validates these two controls together. Now, just as with the main form group up here, you have to pass an object to the form group. And now we just move these two controls into this nested form group. And that's almost all. With that, if you would save this, you would get an error, though, that Angular now fails to connect the password and confirm password inputs. It fails to find these controls. Because they're now in a nested form group, and you must reflect that in your template when connecting it to your form controls. Specifically here, where the password and confirm password inputs are now in a nested form group, you also have to add this link to this nested form group on some shared parent element in this template. So here, for example, this div, this control row div, includes both the password and the confirm password inputs in the end. And therefore, you can go to it and add a special directive on it. The form group directive we already saw before for connecting the overall form. We can also use it to connect a nested form group. So in this case, form.controls.passwords. But just with form controls, writing that full path here can be annoying. That's why Angular also gives you a form group name property, which you can use for registering nested form groups. Now it's just the form group name, which in my case is passwords, that's passed here. And with that, everything's good again, the error goes away, and these two are now in a form group. And we can see that if we submit the form, now we can see that form group here in the controls. We got the passwords form group here. And if we expand that, we got the nested controls. And we also see that in the form value. There we now got that passwords object, which is now a nested object that contains the data for these two confirm password and password controls that make up this passwords form control group. So that's how you can add structure. And we can do the same now for the address data. Here, after last name, we can add an address property, which is also a form group. And then here we also pass an object to that. And now we can move street, number, postal code, and city into this address form group. And just as before, we now just also have to make sure that our connections still work. So in this case, I got this field set element that acts as a wrapper around all these address inputs. And therefore, we can add the form group name directive on that and give it that name of address. which is that name I chose here. With that, this also still works if I reload that. And again, if I submit this, we now also have this nested address data. And as you can already see, that already made this value object a bit more readable because we're now working with some nested objects to give this a structure that makes a bit more sense. So that's how we can work with nested form groups. Now, in our form, there's still one kind of input, or to be precise, a group of inputs that's not registered yet. And that's this "how did you find us" part. In the end here, we have 3 different inputs, but of course, if we really think about it, it's one input with a list of values that can be checked or unchecked. That's how we could think about it logically. And therefore, we could register 3 individual form controls and possibly group them together into a form group. But if we then ever add more options here, we would also have to add them with different names and so on to our form group here as well, which could quickly get annoying. That's why Angular also gives you another kind of form control or form group you can create. So let's register a source control here, let's say. And I will register it as a so-called form array. And form array, just like form control and form group, must be imported from @AngularForms. Now, a form array is meant to be used whenever you have a list of controls where you don't necessarily need or want a unique name per control, but where you instead have a list of controls that are meant to work together in the end. Form array therefore takes an array instead of an object as an argument, and here you now add form controls, but you don't give those controls any names. Instead, you just have form controls with an initial value if you want to, for example, false. And I can quickly add 3 form controls to represent these 3 different options. And if I ever add a 4th one, I just have to quickly duplicate this. And we could even write some code that generates this array dynamically if we wanted to. We could also generate the options in the template dynamically. But here I'll deliberately keep that all a bit more explicit so that you fully understand what's going on here and how these things are related. But with that, I now got a form array that consists of 3 different form controls, and the overall array has a name of source. With that, in the sign-up component, we still have to link that though, and for that we need to go to the element that wraps the different input elements that make up this array. So in this case, we can go to the field set, since that does wrap all these inputs. And there we now can use the form array name directive to provide the name of our form array in our form. So in this case here, I chose source as a name, and hence that is the name we have to use in the template here. And then we still need to connect these inputs, but we simply do that by using form control name and by giving them incrementing numbers starting with 0, since we're in the end in an array here. And again, we could also dynamically generate that and automatically set the form control name to the index of the loop we might be going through. Here I'm doing this very explicit so that it's hopefully clear how this markup in the end maps to this form array here in our overall form. But that's then all. With that, we can save this. And if I now, for example, check the middle item here and I click sign up, you will see that of course in the controls we have this array, and we could now access it to get more information about it, but we also find it in the value property on the overall form, and there source is an array where the middle item is true because it is checked. And that is therefore a quick and easy and convenient way of managing inputs like these checkboxes, which in the end together make up an overall input, an overall control, if you want to call it like this.